August 21st, 2001. This is the How It Works class, Session 2, The Nature of Man. So good evening. We're already smaller. I love watching that. Robert, my guru, my beloved teacher, didn't like big crowds. He always liked small, intimate groups because the people that are really interested, the teaching is higher. And so he used to laugh. And he said, whenever the big groups come, he says, I know exactly what to say to piss them off and run them away and get the group down to the ones that belong here. So I didn't know I'd inherited that trait from him. Nonetheless, we're speaking truth here. I want to remind you again that the point of this is not to believe what I say or to even accept it. The point of this is just to hear it. And I also want to say, don't try to understand it. Just hear it. Just let it in. That's the reason we have the meditation at the start, is so that we can all get into sync and get open so that we're on the same wavelength and so that we can hear. So just be open. Don't try to figure it out. Just let it in and check inside of you and see whether it feels right. I won't say things like sounds true or anything like that, because that gets your intellect into it. But we all know in the center of us when we're hearing truth and when we're hearing bullshit. And that can be developed. You can learn to trust that. So listen to yourself and find out whether what's being said here tonight resonates with you or not. And if it doesn't, that doesn't say anything about you, and it doesn't say anything about me. It just says that I'm not your teacher. Oh well. Maybe another time, or another teacher, or another place. Tonight's topic, according to the list, is the nature of man. Last week we did the nature of God. I was walking with somebody this afternoon, I was chuckling. This topic should be a lot easier. Last week, we talked about the nature of God, and the first thing I have to say about the nature of God is that it's absolutely impossible to discuss the nature of God, right? And then we went on for an hour. So tonight, at least, we all have some practical experience with part of the nature of man. So we'll talk about that. The first thing I want to say, and the thing we'll talk about the whole evening, is that the nature of man is really twofold. There's this material being, this body, this mind entity that we trundle through this experience with. And there's also the spiritual part of us, the spiritual nature of man, that many of us are not very familiar with, and that we are becoming more and more familiar with as we do the work in Alcoholics Anonymous, and as we come to classes like this, and as we read the books that we read and do all that sort of thing. I like to quote some of the things that Jesus said, not because he's my own personal teacher, but because he is a teacher. He is a great master, like Buddha was, like Lao Tzu was, like many others. And he said lots of things so very clearly that you don't hear in the churches particularly. But the things he said are very clear, and I brought a few of them here tonight that really point this out. Here is this man, this teacher, this guy who's wandering around healing people and raising the dead and doing all sorts of things like that. And he says, I can of my own self do nothing. Now, the church would have you think that this is the only Son of God, and how can he of his own self do nothing if he's the Son of God? The fact is, he's talking about this physical entity, this physical entity separate from God, can of its own self do nothing. He said, the Father within me does the works. Okay, the spiritual part does the works. He said, if I speak of myself, I bear reference to a lie. And what he's saying is that this physical self, this physical entity, if I talk about this, it's a lie. He's saying the reality of me is this spiritual being. He says, call no man on earth your father or your mother. He's saying you don't have human parents. And but then he says, I and my Father are one. That's the Father in heaven that he's talking about. That's God, with whom he is one. That's his spiritual being. He says, call no man on earth your Father, but then he's acknowledged as the Son of God. And everything that Jesus said about himself, he meant about everybody. He said, you call no man on earth your Father. And he means that your Father is God. He means that you're one with God. Jesus thought he was no different from us. He thought nobody was any different from anybody else, and he didn't think there was anything special about him. The difference is that he was very aware that there's this human aspect of him, and there's this spiritual aspect of him. And we hear it a lot in AA. We've heard lots of people use the expression that we're not a human being learning to have a spiritual experience. We're really a spiritual being having a human experience. And that was the consciousness that Jesus had, and the consciousness that Buddha had, and the consciousness that Shankara had, and Lao Tzu, and all those people. They were, and Robert, the consciousness that Robert had, my teacher, and Bhagwan. These people were all aware, all the time, that they were spiritual beings, and that there was also this human experience going on. In Robert, it was so very clear that Robert didn't even think that physical body we called Robert was him any more than any other physical body in the room. Get quiet again for a couple of minutes. And let the consciousness get quiet again. The most important thing that we do in these classes is come together into the consciousness, and the first 5 minutes of the class is the most important. to come in here and be in the consciousness. We had a real silence here at the end of our first meditation, and even now it's not that silent again. So an important thing that you do is get here on time and be here for the first meditation so that we can all get in sync and get into that silence together. So, in Joel Goldsmith's books, he'll talk about 3D and 4D, and what he's talking about by 3D is the human being, the mental, spiritual, the mental, physical being. And when he talks about 4D, he's talking about the spiritual part of man. And that's the dichotomy that we live with and come in with and are really here to learn about and to deal with. There's a great story, I think Jesus told it, but I'm not sure. It might even be in the Old Testament about the prodigal son. And there's some good points in that. This king has two sons. He's a very rich king with huge estates as far as the eye can see. And he has two sons. And one of the sons decides that, upon attaining manhood, decides that he wants to go out on his own and do his thing in the world and make his mark. And he asks his father for his share of his inheritance at that point. And off he goes out into the world. And he goes through whatever he goes through, spending the money and losing the money and going through whatever things he has to try. He might have been an alcoholic and managed to blow everything. In any event, he spent quite a while losing everything he had, and eventually he did in fact lose everything he had, and he was very poor and he was very starving, and he wound up, way, way, way far away from his father's kingdom, working at a job for some other man, and what he was doing was feeding the man's pigs. And he had this moment of clarity. What he realized in the moment of clarity was that his father's servants were doing better than he was doing. That in fact these pigs were eating better than he was eating. And his father's servants were doing a lot better than he was doing. And it occurred to him that maybe if he went back to his father, not as a son, but and asked him, could I be a servant, that his life would be improved. And so he starts wending his way, working his way, walking back to his father's kingdom and his father's house. And word gets to his father, who hears that he's coming, and the point is that his father runs out to meet him and meets him on the trip back, and immediately puts the ring on his finger and puts the robe on him and brings him in, and they kill the fatted calf and feeds him, and this whole thing. And this is a parable about the human experience. The father, of course, represents God, the spiritual being. The son who decides he wants to go out and do it for himself is the human who decides that he's separate from his father and can take care of himself. I have a great affinity for this because when I was 14, I realized the apparent hypocrisy of the church that I was associated with, and knew how bright I was and how smart I was, and knew I could do it better than you anyway, and decided I didn't need that God crutch, and off I went on a path of self-serving, which resulted in 20 years of drunkenness before I got back to this program, before I had that moment of clarity. In any event, the parable is about the humanhood being that the son separated himself from his father and decided he was an individual entity and decided that he would rely on his own power and his own strength and his own skills and would go out there and take care of business and win, And of course he had a tremendous advantage going out because he did have his share of the inheritance, but still he went out. And the further he went, obviously, he lost everything he had because he wasn't capable of doing it by himself. He also forgot where he came from. He lost sight of the fact that he was the king's son, and because he had to have that moment of clarity. And so he went down and down and down. And this is the human story. And this is all part of the spiritual path, by the way. My going out there and drinking for 20, 25 years. Well, I drank for 18 of those years, but I was on the path for 20-some years. This is all part of the spiritual path. This was the part of the spiritual path that was devoted to me becoming teachable. And I was unconsciously on the spiritual path during that stage of my journey. Okay, then the son does have the spiritual awakening, which many of us have, which is usually what can bring us into AA, for example, that moment of clarity that this doesn't work, anything would be better than this. And then there's the long path back, which is he's now consciously on the path. And he's getting closer and closer and growing and growing. And this is also, the whole thing is a parable of the human experience. We think we're separate from God. We have a moment of clarity. We start finding teaching. We start finding learnings. We start having insights with God. We start doing whatever we need to do as we're consciously on the path, and our understanding grows, and we come closer and closer to home, and we discover that not only does God not come to meet us, but in fact, God was always here. All there is God, so it was always here. So this is really the story that, to me, explains pretty clearly the difference between the humanhood and the spiritual being, and we are all dual until we completely realized, like a Christ or like a Buddha or like a Lao Tzu or somebody like that, until we completely realized that in fact we're entirely the spiritual being, and that the human experience was just like a dream. We talked a little bit about dreams last class, and the human experience is just like a dream. It's really totally unreal. So that's the distinction, the twofoldness of this. And we all spend, well, first of all of us are clearly consciously on the path, or we wouldn't be here. So we've all finished the trip out, we've all had the moment of clarity, and we're all on the trip back. The trip back takes as long as it takes. The moment of clarity, by the way, is pure grace. We have nothing to do with determining when that moment of realization happens. Usually we have been beaten into submission or teachability, or pain is often the driver, although it's not necessary. But the moment of clarity is a moment of grace. And then slowly we grow our spiritual consciousness through the methods we talked about last week, and we'll talk about more in future classes, and become more and more aware of the presence of God and who we are. It's my understanding that the purpose of life, the universe, the human experience is to recognize who we are. We all like to think that the way this is supposed to work is we're supposed to eventually get to where we have the white picket fence and the nice little house and the sweet retirement, and we sit back and live happily ever after. But in fact, what this experience is about our learning to recognize who we are, and discovering the fact that our nature truly is spiritual, is 100% spiritual. And the universe is perfectly designed to bring us to that understanding. It doesn't care how fast that happens, but it's perfectly designed to bring us to that experience. There are all sorts of things that drive us to grow spiritually, like I mentioned, pain, discomfort, all those things. Humanhood doesn't work. Humanhood is always two-sided. It called dualism by many of the teachers. Dualism is the very human state that everything has its opposite. If there's right, there's wrong. You can't recognize right unless you know what wrong is. You can't recognize what good is unless you know what bad is. You can't recognize wealth unless you know poverty. Tall requires short, hot requires cold. Duality is the human nature, and that's the constant in human nature. And Buddha's teaching, Buddha had Four Noble Truths, and his first noble truth essentially paraphrases to being human is miserable. It's a miserable state of affairs. And the reason for that is because if you don't have anything, you spend your time wanting it. If there's something you don't have, you spend your time wanting it, and you're miserable that you have it. The opposite of what you have. If you have something, you spend your time worrying that somebody else will take it from you or you'll lose it. Okay? Just the idea of having things, and the idea of having things implies the possibility of not having it. And the idea of not having something implies the possibility of having it. And it's just the human nature to either want what we don't have or worry that we'll lose what we have or want to be more this or less that. The very nature of humanhood is this duality. That's the 3D world. And it's completely driven by fear. There was a statement that I heard, a long time ago, that every human action is based in fear. Every human action is based in fear. The other side is the spiritual side, and the spiritual side is about oneness. All there is God. All there is consciousness. All there is spirit. The spiritual side is about oneness. And the nature, and every action that is spiritual in nature is based in love, which gives you a real quick test to see whether what you're doing is your spiritual self or your humanhood. What's the motivation for it? Is it based in fear, or is it based in love? Is it based in the sense of unity, of not trying to get or give or anything, just of oneness, or is it based in love, or is it based in trying to take care of ourselves or accomplish things for ourselves or get what we want, or the fear that we won't have it, or fear that we'll lose it, or fear that we'll be hurt, or fear that we'll be left, or fear that they'll never leave us, or we're miserable because we can't get married, and then we get married, and we're miserable because we're not single, and we're miserable because we don't have a job, and then we get a job, and we're miserable because we have no freedom, and on and on and on. So a great deal of the human experience is about recognizing this, and the whole path back is spent between those two. Sometimes we're clear and we're coming from love, and sometimes we're afraid and we're coming from fear, and we ping pong back and forth, and it's what Joel calls living between two worlds. By the way, there's a Joel book on called Living Between Two Worlds, and there's like 10 or 12 different Joel tapes, 20 hours of Joel classes entitled Living Between Two Worlds, for people that find that they're living between two worlds. And living between two worlds is often painful. It's not comfortable. It's very much like, for me, when I gave up drinking, I used to think about, the day after I quit drinking, I thought about drinking the entire day, very intensely. Okay? And I thought about it all the time very intensely, but I didn't drink. Sometime later, I thought about it with little gaps in between and less intensely. And later on, it was not nearly as intense, and later on, it was not nearly as frequent, and it slowly dissipates. The same way with this transition from thinking of ourselves as humans to thinking of ourselves as spiritual beings. As our consciousness expands, we have more and more moments in God, and they become more intense and last longer, and we have fewer and fewer moments of intense humanhood, and they become less intense and last shorter, and the shift is over to the spiritual understanding. Occasionally, with spiritual awakenings, occasionally we get ahas, clicks or ahas I call them, some small, some big, some permanent, one permanent for each person at some point, where we suddenly realize who we really are. But that's the process. The process is a slow transition from the one state to the other, and all of us are at some point along there. All of us are sometimes having the God experience and sometimes having the human experience.
Can you say more about that, when we suddenly realize who we are? Like, what is that? What else can you say about that?
You can't say anything about it. It's an experience.
Okay.
When you have all of the spiritual experiences can't be put into words. Whenever I have any, what I call a click or an aha, I suddenly have a deepening of my understanding regarding something. Okay? I've been listening to some Robert tapes or something like that, and all of a sudden, that's what that means. I remember one I had with Robert. I had been, I'll tell you about that one. I had been listening to some fool before I met Robert talking about some enlightened fool talking about his experience. And I sat there the whole time thinking, wondering, knowing that this guy had something I didn't have, and wondering what he means by what he's saying, and why doesn't he say what he means? Why all this double talk? And he seemed to be unable to explain that question either. And so I'm with Robert for about 3 years, and Robert says something, and just in the same sentence I've probably heard 100 times, and I get this click, and the feeling is, oh, shit. And all of a sudden, I understood what this guy was saying. And what he was saying is what he meant was exactly what he was saying. And now that I understood what he was saying, were I to tell it to you, I would use exactly those words to say it. The problem was not in this man's experience or his ability to explain it. The problem was that I couldn't conceive of the fact that that's what he meant. It was inconceivable to me that that was the reality he was talking about. So, in that sense, it's not explainable at all. I often have a deepening of understanding about this or that or the other thing, and the words never change. The words that I've known for 15 years haven't changed, or 10 years anyway, haven't changed. None of them changed. The sentences that I knew 10 years ago are all the same sentences, but what they mean to me is so much deeper. And Joel had the same experience. He kept getting clearer and clearer and clearer, and the same sentences kept happening. The truth is the truth, but the understanding deepens and deepens. And that's the process. These little clicks, and then bigger clicks, and sometimes one big final click like Robert had. Go on, and that's what we're doing. And that's why we talk, and we will talk in 2 classes about the nature of meditation and prayer, but that's why I keep coming back to the fact that we need to work on expanding our spiritual consciousness and recognizing who we really are, because it is you can't diminish the human experience. What you can do is increase the God experience and let the human experience diminish itself. Rajneesh used to say, how shall I stop my mind? With my mind, and just laugh hilariously at it, What a ludicrous thought. And yet we all trying to stop our minds and be silent, right? He used to laugh, and then he would say the thing that I had no idea what he was saying. He'd say, you all think it's so wonderful. You sit down there, there's like thousands of us sitting there, and he said, you think it's so wonderful that I'm up here, you think it's so wonderful that I sit up here and I'm enlightened. And he thinks, and I think it's so stupid that you all sit out there and don't know you are. So that's where it's at. But the transition from the immersion in humanhood to the spiritual understanding is this long process. We are all thoroughly conditioned, relentlessly conditioned from birth to believe in the reality and absolute truth of our humanhood. I mean, parents believe it. All the words they use believe it. The human language requires us to talk that way. You can't talk without subjects and verbs. Our churches reinforce it. Our schools reinforce it. And along comes television, and the commercials mention not only are you human, but you're not good enough, and you're not pretty enough, and you don't smell right, and your hair isn't right, and so there's this endless production, and this conditioning goes on relentlessly, and that's what needs to be overcome. It's pretty silly. We are so conditioned to believe that this body is real physical, right? And yet, if we use good old material science says that this table is made of molecules. Now, the space between the molecules is like the space between galaxies. Like the actual galaxy, the actual molecule is so tiny compared to the space between them. And the molecule is made up of atoms. And the space between the atoms is like the space between the planets. The size of the atoms is infinitesimal compared to the size of the molecule. So we have now an infinitesimal part of an infinitesimal part of the whole, okay? But now the atom is made up of neutrons and protons and electrons. And the electrons going around the nucleus looks a lot like a solar system. And again, the particles are in an infinitesimal part of the atom. So now we've got an infinitesimal part of an infinitesimal part of an infinitesimal part, okay? And then science points out to us, and in fact, the atoms aren't really there. In fact, we don't know whether they're particles or they're waves. In fact, there's just a probability that they're in any given place at any time. In fact, none of this may happen, may exist. And they go on to point out, if you start reading the more advanced physics, they're talking about virtual particles, particles that disappear before they appear. Now, these are real mathematical things. I mean, this is the current understanding of our reality. Not a chance. There's absolutely nothing there. The percent of that that's solid, even if the particles are solid, is 0.000001. There is no such thing as physical. So how can we have a physical body? And then we have these minds, and this is the one that I love. I have this brain, and all this thinking is going on in my brain. All these thoughts are in my brain, right? Okay, now, so I look at something, and what's the understanding about this according to our biologists and our physicists? Well, there's a light wave bouncing off Wendell's toe, and it bounces up and it strikes my eye, and it strikes the retina at the back of my eye, right? Light waves. No toe here, just light waves, okay? Strikes the back of my eye, and some sort of a biochemical process happens, and the light waves get converted into electrical impulses. Okay? Now the electrical impulses transfer along, the neurons and axons and all that stuff, and they fire up into my brain. So what we really got is electrical impulses going around in my brain. Now my brain has never experienced anything except electrical impulses going around in it. Okay? Where did it get the picture of toe, or red, or green, or blue? How did any of these ideas show up? All it's got is electrical impulses running around inside of it. It's just, how the idea that all of that is going on inside a meatball up here, the whole idea of the whole human picture makes no sense at all to me. It's just, it doesn't compute. The interesting thing is that the brain, which those neutrons or neurons or whatever the electrical impulses are flying around in, that brain itself is one of the things I can think about. Okay? So now I got the brain flying around inside my brain.
But what is thought, though?
Good question. There's something you can explore. It's sure not going around inside of my head. I mean,
That doesn't exist in the brain, does it?
the pundits would have us think that consciousness is within our brain. But I'm conscious of my brain. My brain is within my consciousness, folks. Consciousness is not in my brain. So you can see that even the conditioning doesn't hold up under any sort of close examination. The closer you get to any of these things, the minute they become vacuous. Anyway, enough about that game. Thought is just another experience that we're having in this human psychosomatic experience that we have. Thought is just another experience we have, but it's all going on within consciousness. Now, one more question on that. If God is purely spiritual, and God is the creator, then the creation needs to be purely spiritual. Because there was nothing else to make anything out of, gang. So God is purely spiritual, the creation is purely spiritual. So, any event, enough about that, but it tickles me.
But Lee, are you saying, if we talk about more and more spiritual moments, less and less humanhood, so we're going more and more to living in spiritual, being spiritual beings, living in spiritual moment all the time, then we're also, what you're saying is we are love and we are more loving.
Yes. Yeah, one and the same. So the process is, as I was saying before I went down one of my favorite garden paths, I wrote a book once called Termites that you'll have to see someday about, the termites. Their purpose is to erode all this wooden structure that people have built up for us. Anyway, so we're conditioned from birth to have all these beliefs, and they get reinforced constantly. They're reinforced by everybody you meet, all the people who are not on the spiritual path that you meet, at schools, at churches, at everywhere you go, is this reinforcement. And how do we progress towards having this spiritual experience? The spiritual experience doesn't use the intellect, and we'll get into this next week when we talk, our next class when we talk about the nature of mind and things like that. But the spiritual experience is that intuitive experience that we have. And to have and trust the intuitive experience, the intellect has to get weakened. So what we do is the three things that I mentioned last class, I hope. I can't imagine that I would ever teach anything that I wouldn't mention all three of them. We do three things to expand our spiritual consciousness. One is begin a regular program of listening to tapes or reading or hearing the work of spiritual masters, hearing the truth. And again, I want to say, don't read the popularized works that people write about what spiritual masters said, because what you'll get then is the understanding of someone who is not a spiritual master rather than the consciousness of the spiritual master. But one thing we do is we read and listen. We listen to truth, usually by tapes and by reading and stuff. And that, as this class tonight is, and as the class last week are doing, tends to break down the conditioning. This class, if you're letting it in, not trying to figure it out, but letting it in, is going to have some effect towards breaking down the conditioning. Another thing we do is begin a regular practice of meditation. And the practice of meditation, first of all, is a direct attempt to have the experience. And if it doesn't lead to that right out front, which it seldom will, at the very least it will give you some separation from your mind, because you will realize that I'm sitting here meditating and there's my mind running amok. And you will become aware of the fact that your mind is this independent, autonomous thing that does its own thing without you. And that starts to give you separation from your mind, which is part of this understanding. So the second thing is a regular meditation practice. And the third thing is hanging out with people who are on the path like you or of a higher consciousness than you, i.e. people who are not as conditioned as you and who are working on this, so that instead of surrounding yourself with the consciousness which reinforces the conditioning, you surround yourself with the consciousness which tends to erode the conditioning. Everybody likes to talk about karma a little bit. First, let's talk about reincarnation. And then we'll talk about karma. Most major religions or spiritual practices have a belief in reincarnation, and most spiritual masters that talk about it, all spiritual masters who talk specifically about reincarnation have that experience, this process of going out the outward path to the moment of clarity and the inward path are often a many lifetime experience. And I always wondered about Jesus. He never discusses reincarnation or not reincarnation. And I read somewhere 3 or 4 months ago that actually the Christian Church taught reincarnation until the 15th or 16th century, when some pope decided that it was more beneficial to his flock if they were in fear of immediate eternal damnation or bliss in heaven than thinking that they went on this life after life journey. But there are a lot of arguments, and I don't care whether you believe in reincarnation or not, it makes no difference to me. There are a lot of arguments in favor of it. The Mozarts, who write symphonies at 7, either that's a proof of reincarnation or a proof of God, whichever one you want, but the fact is that people come in that have that do things that are not reasonable without some extraordinary explanation. I have no experience of any past lives of my own, but I have 2 experiences with my 2 gurus. Both of those were very interesting. I think I told you about the one with Rajneesh. I read a book. I read 10 pages. I don't believe in gurus, but I read the first 10 pages of my first Rajneesh book, and I recognized him. Way down here, I knew who that was, and I knew he was my guru, and I knew there was a guru, and I don't believe in gurus, but that has nothing to do with it, because I don't believe that guru is up here, but down here I know that there he is. I just absolutely recognized him, and I know in my very center that that's what that was. And then when I met Robert, the same thing happened. I looked at him and I just my whole being said, "Oh, fuck, here we go again," because I knew who he was and I knew I was lost, you know. So I have that experience, and I think that some of us, if we think about it, have experiences where we just recognize people when we meet them, and maybe because we've done this before with them, done the dance a little differently. So that's one thing to consider, and there are lots of things that I have encountered leading towards it, and it certainly is consistent with all the Buddhist tradition and the Taoist tradition and all those traditions. And the other thing that we sometimes talk about is karma. And we all have expressions that are about karma. You know, what goes around comes around. That's a statement of karma. It's a fairly standard AA belief in karma. When you think about what goes around comes around, we all know that's true. Jesus' expression of karma was, "As ye sow, so shall you reap." You know, you plant wheat, expect to get wheat, don't expect to get corn. You know, I mean, whatever you put down comes back. And Robert describes this whole human psychosomatic thing. He says the whole thing is karmic. Being paid off may not have happened in this lifetime. And, you know, we see people that are very rich this lifetime and they may die rich, but next time they may well come in poverty-stricken, or maybe they were poverty-stricken last time. And so there is this karmic cycle going on that we set in action by our own actions.
How does that tie in with the belief in duality? Is that a result of our belief in duality?
Well, it's in duality that happens, that this all takes place. It certainly doesn't happen in God's world. There is no karma in God's world. Karma is in the human experience. Robert used to talk about, you know, this life is like looking through a keyhole. You look through a keyhole and you see a man killing his wife, and you have your judgments about that. And he said if you just open the door, you could look over here and see that last lifetime she killed him. And then you see that after these two lifetimes over there, the two of them are laughing about it. So, it's an interesting concept.
What's the idea of a purpose for karma? Is it so that at some point people can be even and go to another plane to be more spiritual, or is there a purpose?
The most when I get confused like this, it's because I don't know yet which level to answer this at. The fact is that the way we grow spiritually, the way we learn truth, is by experiencing the results of our own actions and our own beliefs. So what we do has immediate reactions and reflections on us, and we get to experience, you know, the result of our own activities, and tend to stop doing those things and tend to grow. That's really only true at the very physical level. I think we'll just let that go there for now. This will probably come up in later classes, certainly later on in the year.
I'm thinking of population growth and reincarnation. Obviously, there's more people now than there used to be. If someone was in our first life, is that possible? Just have it on.
I don't have any information on whether anybody's in their first life or not. Again, we're looking at a couple of you think this is the only world. And you think that you're only experiencing one lifetime right now.
Clears that right up. There's the multiverse.
Outside of mind, space and time are both within mind. And mind and body are part of this package, and God is beyond that. Okay? So there is no time in God. So it's, so the whole thing breaks down. And also at that level there is no karma. But at that level there is no human experience. It's the human experience. It really is more dreamlike. And how do you know there's only one dream going on?
Are you saying that in the spiritual world there is no karma? Is that what you said?
Yes. There's no duality.
So you can be in a human body in a spiritual world, in a spiritual plane, and have no karma.
Yes. When you realize that you are not that body, mind. If you are not that body, mind, then you have no karma. Although that body and mind may continue to appear to. But knowing that it's not you, you don't.
Like what you were telling us with Robert, when he got sick, he was totally not sick.
Right.
But his body was dying. And it could be that he needed to have that karmic experience, or for some reason or other. But it wasn't his experience.
That's on the right track, but there was no him.
Right.
From his viewpoint,
Right.
we were the ones that saw that. He didn't see that.
Right.
He would always say, who's asking that question?
Because I have a son with epilepsy,
Mm-hmm.
and who got it when he was older. And I often have looked at him lately and thought, so what is it that he's experiencing, or what past life is he living out? What? So you're saying that's my humanness asking that question?
Sure. Yeah, and when we get to spiritual healing, we'll talk a lot about this too. But, none of that is not the right words either, but the reality of your son has nothing to do with epilepsy. The human experience that he's having does, but who he really is doesn't. Joel used to use a sentence. He would say that God is expressing itself as impersonal individual consciousness. Okay? God as consciousness. All there is God, all there is consciousness. God then expresses itself as impersonal individual consciousness. Okay? And that impersonal individual consciousness is our reality from this viewpoint. And that, and we'll get much more into this in another class, but that impersonal individual consciousness then embarks on the prodigal son journey and forgets that it's this impersonal individualization of God consciousness and begins to believe this psychosomatic human physical thing and proceeds to do as many lifetimes worth of journey to the pig trough and back.
It's the statement, what
I do unto others, I do unto myself, more an understanding of oneness.
Yes. Mhm. Yeah, that's the motivation for do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But the statement is, the reality is that, what I do unto you, I am doing unto me, because there's only one. But again, that breaks down because we're talking now from the human viewpoint. And what I do humanly to you humanly, there's two there, okay? And if there's only one, if I'm aware of the oneness, then neither of us is that one.
You could have an understanding of that statement at two different, be at different levels.
He'll have understandings of all these statements at all different levels.
Like at one level, it could be just trying to be a good human, practicing good human.
Which is a real good, which is a real good thing to do, karmically speaking. While you're believing this experience, while you're believing that this is the reality, then it's wise to pay attention to karma.
Well, and it's also good to do on your way to spiritual enlightenment, because otherwise you're going against all spiritual laws if you're not practicing good humanhood.
Mm-hmm. And you'll be in so much misery that you have no free time to grow spiritually. Yeah. The other practice.
But the spirit doesn't ever want to experience misery?
I'm sorry?
Does the spiritual side ever want to experience misery?
No.
No.
There is no misery.
Well, there is no misery.
So the process, as I was saying, is to meditate and to read, do the reading and stuff to thin the conditioning until we can have these moments of intuition. And then we continue this practice and we grow the intuition and we grow the experience of God. And as that experience grows, our humanhood diminishes. And even when you completely see it all, still the human body continues to run. Robert used to say that, at the moment of enlightenment, it's like you've got a fan on the floor spinning over there, and at the moment of enlightenment, it's like you pull the plug out of the wall. But the fan still spins down, okay? So, and we experience this all the time, even as we have clicks of greater or less significance, even as we have a deeper understanding, we still continue to do the old stuff, less frequently and less intensely, and we always say, I really wish I hadn't done that, St. Paul was a very high dude. He was quite enlightened and was running around doing spiritual healing and all that stuff, and he was the one that said, I keep doing these things which I wish I wouldn't do, and I keep not doing those things which I wish I would do, we all grind down slowly. It's a slow process.
And what's the appropriate response?
Oh well.
I heard you say that once or twice.
Yeah, my expression now is oh well, because I'm much less into it. It used to be oh fuck, still human. even that is tempered, but that's a good one. Oh fuck, still human, Damn. The important thing is give it no energy.
Yeah.
Withdraw your energy from it. Ah fuck, still human. God damn it. And go on about your business. Cut yourself as much slack as you can as you'll let yourself cut yourself slack. let's do questions anything like that for a while. And then I want to tell you about a few things that go on around here. I know we've been doing questions as we go, but who has anything they want to ask about this class or last class or anything in general? We can take 10 or 15 minutes and just talk about anything we want to talk about.
Can we share? Not necessarily ask a question?
No.
Okay.
No.
Something came up for me. I have a question for you. We were talking about karma. I know you kind of want to get over that this session, but so what I heard was a lot of times in this lifetime we're paying karmic debts for things we did last time. Most of my life I don't remember my last lifetime. I'm here. I need to learn from my karma. Karma's kind of like a big. We learn from it. It's like oh, I did that, and this happened, so I'm not doing that again. If I can't remember a lot of the big karmic debts I'm paying off, where's the learning coming? Like, if part of the karmic debt I'm paying this lifetime is from last lifetime, I can't remember last lifetime.
Okay, originally the learning of karma comes from the fact that you wind up so miserable that you get driven to a spiritual path. Now that you're on a spiritual path, the learning comes, you don't need to know about that, about what the cause was. If you understand the principles, as you sow, so shall you reap, you understand karma, and you can look at your actions and expect that they will come around. And so you change your behavior out of enlightened self-interest. As I say, I have no memory of any previous lifetimes. I know I spent a lifetime with Robert, and I know I spent a lifetime with Bhagwan, but I don't have any recollection of these at all.
So as we just go along the path, there's just more experiential and less you need to know who and why.
Yeah. Yeah. That doesn't matter at all, who and why. It's only, people always like to talk about karma because it's a buzzword, It's a thing that people like to talk about, but it may or may not be comforting to know that some of the inexplicable things in your life are due to karma. But actually, the higher teaching is that your experience right now is a result of your own current state of your own beliefs, and we'll talk about that in the nature of mind next class.
Because ultimately, there's no karma on the spirit level. So.
Ultimately, there's no. Everything is at three levels. There's the material level, and then there's the metaphysical level, and then there's the spiritual level. Okay, and all the stories change in all three of these, and the karmic is really at the material level. And we're all moving well past that now. We're all moving well into the metaphysical level, and we'll talk about that next week, in next class, and when we talk about the nature of mind, which is about metaphysics, we'll talk about that quite a bit more.
That's a very good thing, because when I think about living in the karmic world, that's where pain and you owe and you should and all that bad stuff.
And it goes on forever. And it goes on forever.
Yeah.
And it goes on forever.
Yeah, there's no satisfying it.
Because
so if you're out of there,
I kill you,
good.
and then you come back next lifetime and kill me. And so I come back next lifetime and kill you back, and then you kill me. This is you've heard the Eastern tongue about the wheel, the endless wheel, and the whole purpose is to wake up and get off the wheel. That's the wheel, gang. The wheel is the karmic wheel. Karma powers the wheel.
That's amazing.
That's the endless
That's
wheel.
a bad thought.
Yeah, I know. And the only possible purpose that can have is to drive you to the point where you want to wake up, after the first 200 or 300 times around that wheel.
I'm just thinking, I don't know if everyone in here, but I know a lot of people in here, including myself, are recovering alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a heck of a road to go, to be one and try not to drink and get into recovery. And I'm just wondering, is there any thought on, maybe we chose to do this in the previous life, we came in to learn how to get over this, what would be the purpose of that? Why do we have alcohol?
That was your journey.
Am I making any sense?
Sort of. I hear the question.
Maybe in a previous life
For me, alcoholism was what was a gift. It was the short stick that whipped me into submission. I mean, for an arrogant 14-year-old who didn't need God and could do it himself, what quicker way to get him teachable again than to make him an alcoholic? You know, unfortunately, there was no crack cocaine and stuff like that around then, so it took me 18 years of serious drinking. You know, I couldn't burn myself out in 3 or 4 like they're doing now. But
God bless crack cocaine.
yeah, it's all part of the path. Yeah, all of that was part of it's part of my path.
It's interesting that you say that the correct response to realizing something about your humanhood or coming to is, well, or fuck human, still human, or something like that. And that's all the credence that you give it?
That's all I give it. Mm-hmm.
That's really amazing. Because then the guilt is gone. There's no judgment. There's no nothing. It's just like...
Guilt is the surest way that you can find to make certain that you repeat whatever it is you're feeling guilty about.
Oh, no wonder. Yeah. No.
The spiritual understanding is that you have always been doing the best you can given the information or lack of information that you had at the time. And feeling guilty about doing something is like expecting a 3rd grader to feel guilty about failing the algebra problem.
So what do you do when you find yourself in that guilt? You call someone, or you do your meditation, or you...
Say, oh well.
Oh well.
Yeah.
I get caught into it. I can't get out.
Call somebody.
Yeah.
Call somebody who will say something nicer than oh well to lift you out of it. Yeah, get lifted out of it.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do in AA meetings is someone will be telling this terrific story, and the whole room is caught up in the drama of whatever their story is, and I just watch Lee, and he never buys it.
Yeah.
And it lifts me totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I listen. I go to AA meetings and I'm listening to script events and kid events and stuff like that. I never buy the drama anymore. I never believe the drama. And that's an amazing freedom. And if you don't believe the drama, then there's no guilt, because I don't believe my drama either. You know, that's all gone. You know. So I can't make a case for myself about anything anymore.
All the drama.
Yeah, it's all
That's
gone.
just going over my head what's today, you know. Oh, man.
Script is nothing but drama. Kid is nothing but drama. It's all drama.
But it's part of the process, right?
Sure. Yeah, nothing wrong with it. Yeah,
Learn how to see yourself.
don't get dramatic about your drama. It's just part of the process. Just say, oh well. Say, oh well. Oh well, still dramatic.
Still an actor. What do you do in your class? Oh, well, we just say oh, well. We're learning how to oh, well.
Slowly, you will learn that the way you get rid of things is by withdrawing energy from them. I said earlier, how shall I stop my mind? With my mind? No, not with your mind. You can't. If you try to stop your mind with your mind, if you try to stop your mind, you're using your mind, and that obviously can't work when you think about it for more than a second. But if you pay no attention to your thoughts, your mind will fall silent. If you just withdraw all the energy, if you don't try to think and you don't try to not think, and if you do think, you say, oh, thinking, and nothing more, just withdraw the energy, and it just runs out of gas. And there's silence. So let me tell you, I made these careful notes here, and now there's not enough light to see them really. Shane, on the switch behind you, the left switch on the right of it, push that little rheostat thing up. Left switch, right side of it. Push that thing up there. That's the one. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah, let's go through it. Okay, let me tell you what's here. There's a room on the hall back there next to the bathroom. And in it are, 300 Joel Goldsmith tapes, 600 hours of Joel Goldsmith classes that have been recorded. And there are 150 or 200 hours of Robert Adams talks that have been recorded. And there are 125 transcripts of some of the Robert talks that have been printed. And they're all in there for you to help yourselves to. Typically what we do is the tapes are all in places where tapes go, and there's a card there. Take the tape out and write your name on the card and bring it back, and you put a buck in the basket, and that's what we used to use to buy the tapes, and now we use it to buy books or whatever, or replace things or whatever we have to do. So there are lots of Joel tapes and lots of Robert tapes, and there are also, there's now a Robert CD for almost every Robert tape. And the CDs are much better because I've done a lot of noise reduction, digital noise reduction on them, so all the background noise has been chopped out of it because Robert had Parkinson's disease and was starting to mumble pretty badly in 1992, so it was difficult to hear him if there was background noise. So help yourself to those things. All of that stuff is also available on the internet. And if you'll check with me, if you want to listen to it on your computer, you can do so, and I'll tell you how to get to that if you want to do so. There's also maybe 100 Barbara Mull tapes, which are specifically the tapes that were made during her series of classes in which she introduced the script and the kid work. And you're welcome to borrow those on the same basis. So all of that is there. There's some Joel books in there. Just say about Joel Goldsmith books. For people who are fairly new at this practice, Joel Goldsmith is as good a metaphysics teacher as I know of. He also was a real clear mystic, but his student body was at the level where it was important to teach them metaphysics first, and so he's an excellent source of metaphysics understanding. And I'll be glad to give you the names of some books. There are like 4 or 5 books that are real good to start with. The Practicing the Presence, and then The Art of Meditation and The Art of Spiritual Healing are 3 of them that are excellent. And subsequently, there's Living the Infinite Way, and there's 5 or 6 more that I'd be glad to recommend to you. Joel Goldsmith is a wonderful source of this stuff. And I have some books in there that you could borrow, actually. The Joel books, if you find you like the book and you want to spend some time with it, why, they're all available from Amazon, at Amazon.com. And they're also available from Acropolis Books.
Is it just under Joel?
Joel Goldsmith. If you're reading the Joel books, I would suggest that what you do is you read a page or 2 or 3 at most at any given time. And the idea is not to burn through the book so that you can get to the next one. The idea is to hear what he said. And typically what you want to do is read enough that he said something, and then take that with you throughout the day. A good time to read is first thing in the morning so that you can take it with you in the day. Another good time to read is just before you go to sleep so that your head is filled with spiritual thoughts during the night rather than the other thoughts. That's a good thing to do. I also recommend to a lot of people that grab one of these Joel tapes or Robert tapes and keep it by your bed so that if you wake up at 3 in the morning and your head's screaming at you, the conditioning is screaming at you, just flip on the tape. And, after you've been listening to Joel, put them in your car so that you listen to them on your way to work or to school or wherever you're going. After you've listened to these tapes for a while, you'll be absorbed into the consciousness of Joel or Robert, and it will turn out that after having done that, you can listen to a Joel tape for 1 minute and get lifted out of your jealousy or your guilt or whatever. These tapes can lift you out of this sort of thing too, and you can keep those handy. So those are available. I recommend the meditation practice, and we do have 3 meditations here every week, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday at 7:30. There's cards at the end of the table there, which list the meditation schedule. You can come as early as 7 if you want to meditate for an hour, and don't come later than 7:30 so that you won't disturb the people between 7:30 and 8. And all you do is come in and sit down anywhere you want to sit, and at 8 o'clock I'll ding a chime so that these chimes so that you'll know it's over, so you don't have to look at your watch, and that's all there is to that. There's no teaching, there's nobody saying anything. Bring anybody you want to bring. There's nobody here that thinks they know who ought to be here. So that's a fair game.
Is that in the morning or?
At night, from 7:30 to 8 at night on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. There's cards right there at the end of the little coffee table. Grab one on your way out. The website, lila.org, there's a card there that's got the website on it. You can go there if you want to see about the other workshops that we do, the script and kid and relationship workshops. For those of you who are doing the relationship class, the new relationship book is available finally. And the new relationships handbook it's been edited thoroughly. Somebody, Adele, went through it and edited it so that, she cleaned up my language and made sentences out of stuff and did all that, and made paragraphs all be in one plurality or singularity and stuff like that. So it's rewritten fairly extensively in that sense, but the content is not different at all from the preceding one. So if you've got a preceding one, that'll be fine. And while we're doing the work, the bullets under each non-negotiable are essentially the same. So if you've already got one, that's fine. But if you don't have one, get one of the new ones.
How much are they?
$10.
Do you have phones from this class?
From this class, no.
Can we get one?
Well, I suppose I could, but I thought this was just sort of a talk type thing. It's not like we're doing homework or anything, so I haven't thought about that. Y'all want phone lists so you can call each other?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. I think I have all your phone numbers. We'll have that next time. Okay, so that's what's going on around here. And I take phone calls from 6 a.m. until 9 p.m. Unless, of course, you're about to drink. Then any time.
I thought you were correspondent.
But if you're having trouble sleeping, I'm probably not, so don't call me. But otherwise, feel free to call during the day with questions or whatever. Okay, let's be quiet again for 2 or 3 minutes.